question of humanity.
It's a question of freedom and right to self-determination.
It's a question of women's honor and martyrs' blood.
It's a question of blinded children.
It's a question of international law.
It's a question of Kashmir's future.
It's a question of illegal settlements.
It's a question of life under siege.
It's a question of Jammu and Kashmir.
It's a question of illegal settlements.
It's a question of the people of Kashmir and their right to self-determination.
It's a question of the freedom of the people living there. Welcome to our special transmission on this very important day. As we all know that today is the 5th of August, and exactly 1 year ago, the Indian government abolished the Article 370 and also removed the Article 35A, taking away the freedom and the special status of the people living in Kashmir.
It's been 365 days to that day. We know lockdown because of the coronavirus pandemic, but we know nothing, and we cannot even imagine what the people of Kashmir are going through, not just for the past 1 year alone, but also for many decades.
Just imagine 100,000 people have laid down their lives for this very noble cause, for this indigenous, homegrown movement. But still, we do not hear much from the international community.
Basic human rights violations are happening every day in Kashmir. So many people are suffering: children, the elderly, the women, the men and the youth of Kashmir. And it is unfortunate that we see that the international community does not respond to the sufferings of the Kashmiri people as they should.
Just think about those 10 million people living in the Indian-occupied Kashmir and in Jammu as well. And just imagine, the other day I was thinking, Sana, when I looked at a stadium and they said that, well, this is one of the largest stadiums in the world and the overall capacity is 100,000. Just imagine, just multiply that number with 10 and give them absolute trigger-happy control and just let them shoot the civilians, and there's no one to take care of you, no one to look after your affairs. It is curfew there, as Sana just mentioned, and the life, it's a living hell. As they say, that Kashmir, the Indian-occupied Kashmir, is the largest living prison on earth.
Right, Faisal, you told me to imagine, but it is an unimaginable thing what the people of Kashmir are going through. And since the 5th of August last year, the impact and implications for the people of Kashmir have worsened. Their sufferings have increased, and they have been under lockdown and siege and other restrictions for so long, and they continue to suffer to this day just for their basic right of self-determination and freedom. Let's watch this report on Article 370 and its impacts and implications.
For a year now, Kashmir has been locked down by India. Indian government has flooded Kashmir with troops. There is no internet. Mobile phone services are dead. Schools, markets are closed, and movement every day is paralyzed. Modi, by placing Kashmir under New Delhi's direct rule, fulfilled his election promise and Hindutva agenda at the cost of Kashmiris. On 5th of August, Modi's BJP government formally revoked the state of Jammu and Kashmir's constitutional autonomy and split it into 2 federal territories in an attempt to integrate it fully into India. It was a massive assault on identity and autonomy of Kashmir. It was the implementation of a decision made by Modi's government through a legislation in the parliament to end Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, which guaranteed special privileges to the predominantly Muslim region. The Indian government's abrogation of Kashmiri's semi-autonomous status on 5th of August 2019 was accompanied by massive security raids across the region to detain people accused of involvement in protests. Modi's government carried its Hindutva agenda further, and in December 2019, Indian Parliament passed the Citizenship Amendment Act. The legislation sparked violent protests across the country as it is discriminatory against Muslims. The legislation aimed to fast-track citizenship for Hindus, Parsis, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains and Christians who arrived in India before December 31, 2014 from Bangladesh, Pakistan or Afghanistan. However, the Muslims were excluded from the list. People took to the streets against this legislation, and protests in various cities turned violent. In Delhi, police resorted to tear gas shelling, guns and batons to push back protesters at Jamia Millia Islamia University. Shaheen Bagh became a site of popular resistance against Citizenship Amendment Act where people belonging to all religions joined its women demonstrators. BJP leaders maligned the Shaheen Park protesters. These laws fit within the BJP-led government's larger agenda to construct a Hindu nation. Modi's government, now in its second term, has already taken key steps to implement this vision. Millions of Muslims in Kashmir and India are living under threats. Modi's extremist policies towards Muslims are encouraging RSS to persecute Muslims in India at will. This is not the face of secular India. Modi has turned India into a fascist state where minorities, especially Muslims, have no rights.
Welcome back. You are watching the report on Article 370 and its impact and implications. Faisal, of course, as we see, there's such huge impacts and implications of this revocation. And we see that it's not just the people of Jammu and Kashmir that are suffering. In fact, this is the human rights violations on such a larger scale. It's a violation of international law. It's a violation of UN Security Council resolutions. It's a violation of basic humanity. And it's been going on for a year now.
And this is what you were talking about primarily. This is the last 1 year since the curfew has been imposed. But just imagine the last 72, 73 years, what they've been going through. Now, that is actually something we'll be talking about, the future course of action, what needs to be done and how it needs to be done. Let me introduce you to our panelists. Sana, if you allow me, let me start off from my left side. We have with us Lieutenant General Amjad Shoaib Saab. He's a senior political as well as senior defense analyst. General Saab, thank you very much for taking out your time and being a part of this debate. We also have with us Khurram Dastagir Saab, again needs no introduction, is a senior representative of the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz and MNA. Sir, thank you very much for your time. And we also have with us Mashal Malik Saiba, again needs no introduction, is a senior Kashmiri leader. Thank you very much, ma'am, for your time as well.
And on our right, Faisal, we have with us the Honourable Chairman, Kashmir Committee, Mr. Shahryar Afridi. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us today. We also have with us Senator PPP, Ms. Seher Kamran. Thank you, Ms. Seher Kamran, for being with us today. And lastly, we have with us Chairperson, South Asian Strategic Stability Institute, Dr. Maria Sultan. Thank you, Dr. Maria, for being with us today. Before we start, Faisal, I think I would like to go around all of our panelists and actually discuss with them the fact that since it's been 1 year since the revocation of Article 370 and 35A in Kashmir since the 5th of August last year, what has it been like, not just for Kashmir, but in terms of the way the international community has responded, just to see what their perspective is regarding the past year and what has gone through for the Kashmiris. We'll start with Mr. Shahryar.
Well, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you so much for having me in this show, because this day, not only for the people of occupied Kashmir, but for the entire humanity is of immense importance. As you just mentioned, that humanity is bleeding and pleading at all levels, and the entire key stakeholders of this globe, the movers and shakers, have become silent spectators. What the government of Pakistan since 5th of August 2019 as a responsible state, and don't forget that the people of occupied Kashmir, after the divine power, is solely relying on two key stakeholders. One is the international community in the shape of UN and the prosperous world, those who have gone through this pain and agony for number of years, and the second is the state of Pakistan.
Yeah.
So as a chairman, and don't forget the role of the chairman of this committee is not only to become a voice of one single party or a ruling party. We have got members of both the houses, and there's a consensus across the board that when it comes to Kashmir, and especially this draconian approach of Nazis Modi, where he has bullied human rights, where he has conveyed a clear message to not only to UN, but all the key stakeholders of this globe, that India is here to dominate, dictate, and India is willing to bypass any commitment which they earlier committed. So what we have been emphasizing as a committee and as obviously as a state, that we have not only knocked at the door of those who matter the most, we have made it a point that when it comes to parliamentary democracy, or the parliaments across the globe are taken on board, then UN, then human rights activists, and then academia, those who can really do wonders for this initiative. Unfortunately, till this moment, I am so sorry to say that, as a Pakistani, and I must confess that the role of academia at the international level has been nominal. So now we are engaging all the key stakeholders and making the whole globe realize, and especially that pressure in itself will make India realize, because when we talk of any sort of investment, when we talk of this, any region, we need to realize that if we include Russia in this region, 50% of the world population lives in this region. And then India, Kashmir has become a flashpoint, nuclear flashpoint, because nuclear detonates in the shape of India, Pakistan, then if recently what we have experienced in Ladakh between China and India, and then Russia automatically. So the entire global peace is at stake. And on the other side, another area, Pakistan is hosting refugees, 3 million refugees. Globally, we have got more than 70 point something million refugees across the globe. And then statelessness, another important issue. 12 million people are stateless in this globe. The commitment of those who matter the most, the prosperous world, is not to be seen of late, because I am also taking care of Saffron. The role of the prosperous world, UNHCR, we need to keep on reminding, conveying, because in recent COVID, we were the ones who, and my Prime Minister, conveyed in different ways and means to those who met, to the
Absolutely.
UN Secretary General, and then apart from that, High Commissioner of UNHCR. So as a whole, what I'm emphasizing on is, it's not about the genuine rights of the people of occupied Kashmir. It's about humanity. It's about global peace. And above all, it's about those who are deprived of their due rights since 73 or 72 more or less long years. So enough is enough. And I believe the world needs to wake up before it's too late.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. That is not just an issue of Kashmir and the people of Kashmir. This is a global issue. This is an issue of human rights violations. This is an issue of a country notwithstanding its commitments, not being ashamed of actually just violating anything that comes their way, whatever commitment they've made before. That's very important.
It's an absolute violation of the United Nations resolution.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is the primary point. Now, General Amjad Shoaib Saab, your take, sir.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Faisal. As Shahryar Afridi was mentioning, international community definitely has a responsibility, but then with the passage of time we see that the whole issue, this has been diluted in some way, where perhaps the international community has their own strategic objectives in the area. They need India for certain reasons. And at the same time, I think we have also not really stimulated the international opinion. We have not really worked hard to create that kind of awareness which was needed. 70 years there have been, I think this is the third generation which is now looking after the affairs in various countries. And maybe they are absolutely new to the issue and they have forgotten and they don't know or they don't want to really get into the details of this issue. So it was our responsibility to, as Shahryar was mentioning, that Pakistan is their voice. They are looking towards Pakistan or towards United Nations. United Nations, of course, we know is being driven by the by P5. They have their own interests, and it's very difficult for Pakistan to really prevail upon the issue or prevail upon the behavior of United Nations. But at least we can work hard to create awareness amongst the people, amongst the community, international community as a whole.
Right.
And for that, perhaps I think we have to address those questions, those excuses which India has been using on various occasions. For example, when we say that we have to hold plebiscite, then they say that Pakistan has to withdraw their forces from Kashmir. First of all, Pakistan has to act. Now, this is the legal question which has to be addressed, and people have to be told that ultimately it was decided that the forces from Kashmir will be withdrawn simultaneously by India and Pakistan. Now, India has been using this excuse for too long, I would say. Similarly, when they say that abrogation of Article 370 and 335A is our internal issue, then it was Pakistan who has to go around and knock every door and tell the people that this is not the internal issue. it is related to the conversion of the status of a sort of special status of Kashmir into a union territory. Now, how can you convert the status of a disputed territory which is there, which has been recognized by international community, by United Nations? So there is a legal, similarly now when they are changing the population structure within the country, within Kashmir, and they are bringing the outsiders, and they have created a new citizenship law and changed the definition of Kashmiriyat. So that has to be addressed. People have to be told that in a disputed territory, legally you can't do that.
Right, absolutely.
So all these issues where India is at fault, these should have been hammered into the minds of the international community, so that at least if the governments are not reacting, the people from that country should start bringing pressure onto their own governments.
You're absolutely right, and international opinion and public opinion is of huge importance, and it actually shapes a lot of ways that governments and countries then are forced to actually rethink their policies and strategies.
The
But
most important part
yes.
is the demographic change. The way they are changing that, that is something which should not be acceptable to anybody there, even those living inside India. And especially after the CAA, and as we earlier mentioned about after the removal of Article 35A, the special status, that has been taken away.
Right.
That is of prime concern.
Right, but I
Yeah.
also understand, of course, that Pakistan has been on all platforms, on various international fora, raising this issue. And actually, what Mr. Amjad was talking about earlier is raising all of the issues and refuting the claims that India has been making. But I also think the onus is also on the international community to make sure and realize that this is not just about what India claims.
Yeah.
It's larger than that. Ms. Seher Kamran, would you like to comment?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to
It's our
share my
pleasure.
thoughts on this very important issue, which is very close to my heart. First of all, yes, you have very rightly said, it's a question of criminal silence of the international community. It's a question of 365 days complete siege of the fundamental rights of the Kashmiri people. It's a question of cut down of the communication lines and the internet 365 days. So it's today Indian held Jammu and Kashmir is one of the largest concentration camp of the world. I would definitely like to endorse what General Shoaib has said, that the demographic change is very alarming. I believe that the international community should take a note of that. This is a same strategy which Jewish used to change the demography. The same strategy has been used by Narendra Modi to change the demography of the Indian held Kashmir. So in case in future, under any pressure, there has to be this exercise of right of self-determination, and there is a plebiscite, so they could say that the demography is changed. 25,000, I believe, the domiciles have been issued, which is very alarming. Secondly, I would like to specifically talk about the plight of the Kashmiri women who are kidnapped, tortured, raped, gang raped. And this is very alarming. Under no humanitarian law, any international community or organization can keep its eyes closed and mouth shut on such an abuse of humanity. What they have so much of what I would say, torture to face. Their husbands are kidnapped, they are compelled to live the life of a forced widow. Then this rape and gang rape and the torture, their life have been made miserable. So this is very alarming, where international community has to wake up. If they are not waking up now, then I would say there's a question on the very existence of the United Nations. Why the United Nations was established? What were the responsibilities? If I would say today United Nations has become a graveyard of such resolutions which are totally ignored. There has been no implementation. The human rights abuses are ignored. Where are the human rights organizations which create hue and cry on a killing of one animal? They don't see butchering of the Kashmiris every day.
Right.
And then this continuous violation at the line of control to divert the attention. What is happening in Kashmir? It's another crime. In this year, in the 7 months, there have been 1,800 violations of the line of the ceasefire. So how can any any international organization stay silent on such abuse, on such atrocities, where the young boys are blinded with the pellet guns, where the people are kidnapped, where they are jailed, where are imprisoned, where their basic rights are being abused, and the international community is silent. I would say then we should change the name of United Nations. We should make the name of United Nations as a graveyard of the dead resolutions, where it has failed to implement, where it has failed to exercise its basic obligation, its basic duty. It has only become what I say a lip service organization, that also for some of the elites, some of the countries which are serving its interests or which are dominating it. So
Right.
this
Absolutely.
is a question of basic fundamental rights which has to be addressed. And I would also say, when you talk about the United Nations, I would also like to question Organization of Islamic Conference.
I think that is
Right.
also very important, ma'am.
That is very important.
You have raised an important point
Why the Organization of Islamic Conference was established, when they are going to fulfill their duties, when they are going to come forward, when they are going to raise their voice,
All
or
right.
our voices will be ignored only.
Right, we can feel the pain in your voice, of course, and as a woman, I can absolutely relate also to the sufferings of the women in Kashmir, Faisal, because this is happening probably as we
Absolute
speak also.
brutality, and when you talk about these women being tortured, I think they are trying to set an example that if you will ask for freedom, this is what we'll do. But that has not stopped.
Of course, we've seen how resilient they are.
I would say that this particular freedom movement has gained such a strong momentum over a period of time that is now very much visible. Janab, Khurram Dastagir Saab.
First of all, thank you very much for starting this program off on the right note, which is that the question of Kashmir is not a question of territory. It is a question of the human rights and the rights under international law of our brothers and sisters living in Indian occupied Kashmir. It's their welfare, it's their lives, it's their livelihoods that are at stake. The 5th of August 2019 was an Armageddon for Kashmiris. It wasn't that there was new form of state repression. The Kashmiris have been tortured by Indian security forces for decades.
Right.
Rightly pointed out, Kashmiri women have been raped in very large numbers. But the point to note is that the last vestige of security that Kashmiris had was that their separate status had been acknowledged in the Indian Constitution. That has now been taken away, and Kashmir has been now absorbed into the Indian Union territory. But I would say that this 5th of August was also an Armageddon for Pakistan's foreign policy, because it is something that we had feared for so long and acted to prevent. And this fascist Modi government of India went ahead, has done and thrown down a gauntlet of a severe challenge in which Pakistan's diplomacy has to be retooled, not only the classic diplomacy, but non-foreign office diplomacy through social media, through think tanks, as the chairman rightly pointed out, and many other fora for us to raise this question across the world. So, as we are now at a 1-year anniversary, the challenge is very much there. The diplomatic challenge is still there because we are yet to gain a single resolution from any international organization which would, if not support Pakistan, but at least condemn India. And here, I think again, the point raised by the Honorable Senator is very important. It is this use by a state in the United Nations that systematically tortures people, that systematically rapes women. It's not a rogue organization. It's actually the state of India and its troops that are doing it. And it's also doing it under draconian laws like Armed Forces Special Powers Act, the Public Safety Act. So it is something that needs to be highlighted in a very intensive and persistent manner for us to be able to help our Kashmiri brothers and sisters who again rely on us to be their voice. So the challenge is in front of us. The first year has been less than productive, but I hope that today through this program we are able to create an atmosphere which would allow Pakistan and its Foreign Office and its Parliament to act more vigorously in all fora in order to raise the voice of the tortured and oppressed people of Kashmir.
And that's absolutely necessary because when this happened last year, Faisal, on the 5th of August, I don't think anybody could have imagined that for a year the people of Kashmir are going to live under this curfew and this lockdown, and their sufferings will go on for 365 days. Imagine we went through a very minimal lockdown because of coronavirus, but
And
it's been a
you
year.
had food.
And it's so
you
much
had
worse.
all the facilities. Imagine a person without clean drinking water, no food security. If you are injured, you were practically dragged out of the hospitals and you were thrown in the prisons. This is what we have witnessed. There was no report coming out. People could not do anything. And just imagine after 1 year, what Narendra Modi has done today.
Absolutely, of course, the inauguration and the laying of the foundation stone of the Ayodhya Mandir, of course, at the
We'll be
side of the
definitely
Babri
talking
Masjid.
about that too,
That's
but-
very important. But Ms. Maria, we'll go with you.
Well, thank you so much. I would like to, add on to what my colleagues have just said and talked about the importance of 5th of August 2019. I think while we are talking about what has happened in Kashmir, the world has not fully come to terms or braced the reality as to what has actually happened on 5th of August 2019. I would like to say that I'm very grateful that you've got 3 very important legislators, members of the Assembly present here today. What has happened on 5th of August 2019 is that this act of terrorism, which we have seen, which has taken away the people of Kashmir's right of being a Kashmiri, has not been done by a random crowd. It has been done by the August Parliament of India, where both houses have decided that they would take away all legal rights of the Kashmiris. And then when you combine that with the Citizen Amendment Act, what does it mean? It in practical sense means that if you are a Kashmiri and living in Kashmir, you no longer have the right of being a Kashmiri. This basically means now in order for you to stay in Indian occupied Kashmir, you must apply for Indian citizenship. And if you have to apply for Indian citizenship, you have to fulfill 5 conditions. Now, what are those 5 conditions? The 5 conditions are that you must have your name registered in 1938, at least from 1942, at least 5 years prior to 1942. In 1938, National Register for Citizens, which was maintained by the British, that your name or your grandfather's name or your great-grandfather's names or any one of them was registered there. If you don't have that, then you must have 12 years of residence, which should be there. And if you don't have those 12 years of residence and proof of residency, then you must have studied in an educational institution. And if you don't have any one of that, then you would be asked to be placed, which would be done into the concentration camps. So this is not just something which has happened to Kashmir. They did it in Assam. 1.2 million people were put into these concentration camps. So what does it effectively mean? It means you would not be allowed to have any political party which would be owned, led by the Kashmiris. It would mean that you will not be allowed to work in any kind of government office in the Indian occupied Kashmir. It would mean that you will not be allowed to go to any schools, because of course any child which is less than 16 years of education cannot show 12 years of education. So this means they would automatically be transferred to concentration camps and they would be made stateless. And then it doesn't stop there. Then it means you have no health facilities, you don't have a national ID card. Henceforth, that means the Indian ID card, therefore, it means you cannot access basic rights. At this moment, if you are a Kashmiri and caught up in any one of the jails, according to the reorganization bill, you would only be allowed to have just 1 year in which a Kashmiri council can represent you. After that, your case must be represented by an Indian citizen. So this basically means all those people who are locked up in jails will have no recourse to justice. They will have no recourse to any independent body which will listen to them, not inside of India, but even externally. Now, I think this is something which is unheard of. So here, it's not a question of what has happened on 5th of August. Yes, the curfew is terrible. There is no explanation which can be given that 365 days going on and there's a curfew. But what is worse is that you have permanently taken away the right of the Kashmiri people to life. You are going to pick them up, put them into cages made specifically for them, and then after that what the Honorable Minister was stating, that if they are stateless, where will these people go? sent as refugees?
Right.
Will they be sent to Pakistan as refugees? Will they be sent next to the border areas between Pakistan and Kashmir, you know, on the Pakistani Kashmir and the Indian Kashmir? And if that is the situation, Indian occupation Kashmir, then what about the future of these people? And then I think the question is, this is just one part in terms of the humanity of it. Second part is the legality of it. And the third part is what I think all of us, you know, we have the former defense minister here with us as well, is the mere fact that this is not an issue which just represents the people. Yes, it is about the territory. Yes, it is about the people. Yes, it is about the humanity. And it is about 2 nuclear states? No, it's about 3 nuclear states which are locked up in Kashmir. It's not a question of what happened in Ladakh. It's not a question of what will happen between Pakistan and India.
All right.
If you don't handle the situation and you think that these people, you know, on broad daylight massacres would happen, then this would happen. I would just like to slightly
briefly,
add,
please.
Sana,
Yes.
just something, because you just mentioned about the Ramna, the significance of that. The significance is that under the 5th of August 2019, they have come up with a law which says that the scheduled Hindu classes must be reappropriated to Indian occupation Jammu and Kashmir in order to balance out the Muslim majority. So this is what the Reorganization Act states.
Right.
Where in the world you replace people, relocate people, and do this.
That's what
other
I
than
call
India.
demographic changes.
Absolutely. It's like the Israeli formula.
Exactly. In fact, after the meeting between Narendra Modi and Benjamin Netanyahu, when Netanyahu hugged him and said that we have been waiting for you for the last 70 years, this turned out to be the result of that. Over to you, ma'am. Mishal Malik Saiba. Yes, ma'am.
I would just like to, you know, give a technical explanation of what happened, the fallout of Article 35A and 370. From the legal perspective, what happened was, after, which cannot be done legally, but they scrapped 35A. It cannot be scrapped neither in part nor in whole, because if India has done that right now, because this is the first anniversary of that Black Act that India did, that means that the presidential order of the Indian Constitution of 1954 is scrapped, meaning that it has fallen back to 1950 presidential order of the Indian Constitution, which means that Kashmir is autonomous. And technically speaking, Kashmir is independent, but realistically speaking, there is jungle law over there right now. So it's the occupation force, and now the Indian public has also become an occupational residence over there. Forced citizenship is being granted to them. They're getting voter rights. The Kashmiris are becoming refugees on their own land. They're the heirs of that land. But I've lost my state subject because it was a law of Maharaja Hari Singh that he wanted to protect the populace. This is before the partition.
Yeah.
That, you know, the Kashmiri people, if a Kashmiri girl marries an outsider, then she has to forego her property rights, because no outsider should be given that property. So that was protected. It's protected in Azad Kashmir also till the plebiscite happens. I mean, no Pakistani can buy land there. They don't have the voter rights. But over here, because I got married and I was a Pakistani when I got married to Yasin, so I was gifted some stuff there, and now I don't have any right. The same goes for all those Kashmiri women, the way Maria explained that if they don't have that ID card now, so they have another reason for doing this, because they want the Kashmiri girls, the Kashmiri women to marry Indians. And a lot of Hindu politicians also came on the TV that we want those white-skinned girls. And you know, already their forces are raping the women. But otherwise also, I think it's very, very important that Pakistan should realize that this was not just an act of war done through warfare, it was a lawfare. And how has Pakistan responded to it? So my suggestion is, because we have the Kashmir Committee chairman over here, we have all these august speakers, that we really need to form a legal cell within the Foreign Office to give the international, the perspective on international law, because we have to combat this internationally through legal skills, apart from the diplomacy, apart from the politics, because it's so important that we respond to what India has done. We can take this case to the ICJ if we want to debate on it. We can have some kind of sessions with international humanitarian law experts. They have surpassed, or as you mentioned in the beginning, the UN Security Council resolutions, international law, superseded international humanitarian law. Even they violated their own Indian constitution because this was the only legal link between India and Kashmir. They came as an administrative force, though they are occupiers. So that has also been cut. So this is an ideal time for Pakistan to capitalize the situation and to become the true voice of the Kashmiris internationally.
Right.
And also locally, also internally, Pakistan needs to strengthen the coexistence between the political parties. It must be shown. We need to have at least one legal document coming from the parliament also that can be spread around the world, that can be shown to diplomats, to think tanks, to research institutes. And secondly, we need to have an APC on this, a constructive 5-year at least plan, no matter what regime comes into power after their tenure is finished. But you know, we need to have now a full-fledged practical policy that the focus of Pakistan should be on internationalizing it and not on focusing on bilateralism, because that is dead. It's like the shelf life is expired, and this was a brazen Nazi order, and we really need to delegitimize India internationally. So for that we need a team of experts. We don't just need politicians, as you mentioned. Mr. Shahryar said we need accommodations, we need experts, and above all we need maximum representation of the Kashmiris. We have a lot of LOC victims, we have a lot of people from Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir over here, settled in Azad Kashmir, Pakistan or overseas. We need to get them together. We need to make a strategy which shows the victim first and then the spokesperson.
Ms. Mashal, I'd like to ask you another question. You mentioned, you initially began with the fact that, of course, there's a technicality, and of course, it's a violation of that technicality, and that's a violation of UN Council resolution, its own constitution, and the UN plebiscite that you mentioned also. And there's so many violations we see that India has committed, but it seemed like it doesn't have any respect for any of these laws. And in that case, we also see that since it's been such a long time, not just the past year, but many decades before, that the Kashmiris have been suffering. And sure, Pakistan has been raising its voice, and other countries have also spoken up against the human rights violations in Kashmir. But what we still need to understand is, of course, that the cost is still there, and the Kashmiris are still, in fact, paying the cost even to this day. So while our plans are necessary and our highlighting of this issue is very necessary, what can we do for a more immediate response from the international community? Because it went on for a year, maybe it can go on for 5 years.
Yeah.
How long are we going to wait before
yes,
we
you're
need a
right.
response?
You know, there's a long-term policy, there's a short-term one. And in the short term, I think we must all focus on all those international organizations that can help people, because there's an extreme scarcity of food supplies, medicine shortage, airdropping of food supplies. And the short-term goals should be de-weaponization, demilitarization. These are the steps we need to focus on, and for that we need to get some strong UN Security Council resolutions to blacken India, so that we can move towards getting some sanctions against them, either economic sanctions or defense sanctions. And defense sanction case is so strong because the trade that India does, defense trade with France and other countries, because according to international law, it's illegal to buy weapons and to shoot unarmed civilians. If they call this a part, but this is a disputed territory, if they buy these weapons for the sovereignty of India, but they have made Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir into a hunting ground of defenseless people. So the case is very, very strong, and our diplomats in all those countries where India is doing the defense trade, they must accelerate pressure and expose India on this count.
Diplomatic support, moral
Defense
support
sanctions.
that has always been. Now there has to be an
Short term
addition.
is defense sanctions. We need to work, because already
but
the
Mashal
neighbors
Malik,
are
India
so
is
irritated.
a huge country. India has a population of around 1.35 billion people, one of the biggest buyers of weapons, not only from Russia or USA, from France, you name it. And they just want to buy everything which is available from left, right and center. And the kind of economic clout they have, that is something which is very difficult to break for a country like Pakistan at the moment. Your take on that part?
Economic trade, because it's a big market, but the kind of movements that are going on over there, and as Dr. Maria mentioned, the treatment of minorities, how risky it's become for their survival, the forced conversions of Christians, what they're doing with the Muslims, anti-minority bills, with the Buddhists, with the Dalits. It's a very unsafe place, and the neighbors, they're equally irritated by the Hindutva and the saffronization narrative of India, and they're so war hungry that now we have China that's irritated, you have the Ladakh thing going on, you look at Nepal, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan, the American exit from there, and then the world converting from a unipolar to a multipolar world. And right now we are in a non-polar time, which is an ideal time to capitalize it and to utilize maximum pressure coming from the neighborhood internationally through the international UN mechanisms, trying to get a resolution there, trying to globalize what India is doing, and we need expert lawyers also with us to delegitimize what India has done.
Right.
Right? Thank you.
Mr. Amjad Shoaib, I'd like to come to you. What Mishan also was talking about earlier was the fact that now we've also seen that India's neighbors are also not very happy with the way with some of their policies are going, and of course they have their own problems as well. We've seen some sort of isolation that India is facing, particularly in the region as well. Do you think that this could really cost India? Is it something of tangible and significant value that can really affect India's relations and its future?
See, things are changing very rapidly, and I think it has potential when we look at the Indian attitude of expansionism, of bullying the smaller neighbors. If we can create some kind of political consensus amongst the smaller neighbors of India, it will definitely have an impact where we will be collectively perhaps coming up with the narrative showing the true face, Indian face, to the international community.
Right.
But other than that, related to Kashmir, I would say, see, India is going to take over the non-permanent seat in United Nations Security Council in the first week of January next year. See, they have committed very serious violations of United Nations articles and also of the resolutions. We have been talking about it sometimes, but we haven't really taken it up as a campaign where we should really confront India with the legal aspect of these things internationally. For example, Human Rights Commission of United Nations had taken a very serious note of human rights violation in Kashmir, and they ultimately they published a report, and then they recommended that a fact-finding mission should be sent to the Indian occupied Kashmir, and particularly the crimes committed against the women, they should be addressed and they should be investigated. That was a very big step. 5 letters have been written by the Commission to Indian government to allow the fact-finding mission to visit Kashmir. They have not responded. This is how they have rejected the United Nations, and they have just not bothered about it. The other thing is that right from 1948 onward, we have the United Nations peacekeeping force observers here in India and Pakistan. India every time levels an allegation against Pakistan that we are the ones who are violating the LOC, whereas we say that you are the ones. And it used to be the peacekeeping force which we used to decide. They used to visit the LOC, and ultimately they would send a report to the United Nations that we have investigated this incident and so country is responsible for that. Now, India is not allowing the peacekeeping force or the observers to visit the LOC. They are not allowed to go there. They in fact are keeping them in Delhi. Their office is there. They are receiving pay. The United Nations is spending money, but they are not allowed to go there. So naturally, whatever narrative India wants to concoct, they can do that, and every time the blame is put on Pakistan.
Right, absolutely.
Now, this is just a minute. Okay. I want to explain because this is very serious. Now, once they say that India, when we say that we have not violated, and India says that we had to fire because we can observe infiltration from Pakistan and Pakistanis are pushing the terrorists to this side. There is no infiltration. They have a very strong type of fencing along the LOC, and at the same time we assure, we tell to the people that United Nations can come and investigate. But India keeps on saying that you have 14 launching pads on Pakistan's side from where you are launching this. So this is very serious. On one hand, Pakistan is brought to the dock that you are the one who are instigating trouble in in Kashmir, which is very derogatory for us. We are not doing that, which means to say that the struggle which is a very genuine domestic struggle from, which is coming up from Kashmir, from the natives, that is being maligned on one hand. And when international community is being bombarded with a narrative that this is terrorism sponsored by Pakistan, and if international community one day admits that it is terrorism, then India will be free to use all sorts of weapons on those Kashmiris. Because against terrorism, you are allowed to even use your aircraft. You can bomb that area where the terrorists are located. Even today, they are facing such type of atrocities. And if international community reconciles with the international narrative, and ultimately they start using heavy weapons also on them, what will happen?
Now
So these are the things
So the question
that
is,
we should keep on hammering into the international community, whether they react or not. But are we doing our response? Are we really doing that kind of hard work which we should have done? Are we really hammering these narratives to the international community everywhere on every forum? See, there should not be any day where men should be sitting. You just look at the Indians, what have they been doing? Any visitor from any other country visiting India, a joint communique was issued that the neighboring country is sponsoring terrorism in Pakistan, in India, that should not be done. An advice coming up to Pakistan from those visitors. And similarly, wherever the Indians have been going, they have been making sure that they get a joint communique from that country.
make sure that they should
See,
use every
everywhere
platform
they
to
would
unite
never
Pakistan,
spare any opportunity. And this is what we have to do. Now that the international community or the United Nations has recognized that India is the one who's sponsoring terrorism in Pakistan, the recent report which has come,
Of course, that's
we should
extremely
not spare
important.
them.
Yes.
We had Kulbhushan. We could tell to the international community
Yes, of
that
course,
he
but
is a
there's so
serving
many.
person, and
There are
it is
so
the
many,
state
right.
which is sponsoring. Similarly, you can take them to the FATF, that Kulbhushan has admitted that this is what he has been funding here in Pakistan, in Balochistan and elsewhere.
Right, thank you, Mr. Amjad. We're a little short of time. Of course, these are really important points that you have raised, and we must talk about that. And of course, these issues really need to be highlighted. Before the break, Faisal, we'd just like to thank our two respected guests, Ms. Mishal Sen Malik and General Retired Amjad Shoaib, for being with us. And when we come back, we're going to continue with two more esteemed guests in the show. And right now, we'll take a short break.
stay with us.